If you are new to coastal management in California, it is important to understand the history of our state's coastal management program in order to better understand the culture, priorities, and operations of the agency. You are now part of a unique legacy of environmental protection and cutting-edge coastal land use planning. The important work that you do will be a lasting part of California's proud coastal legacy. The Coastal Commission was created by a vote of the people in 1972. It was the first citizen-created state agency in California. It was created through the public adoption of Proposition 20, known as the Save Our Coast Initiative. This grassroots origin underscores the high priority that is given to public participation under the Coastal Act. At the same time, Commission staff's commitment to public service and to the stewardship of the public's resources is a derivative of that initiative and continues to contribute to our agency's core values. This commitment to public service and stewardship is embodied in the Coastal Act, the state agency's strategic plan, and in how we implement the Coastal Act. These values are implemented every day in how we carry out our Coastal Act responsibilities. As staff, we represent and serve the broader public interest, including all people of the state, not just those who live in coastal localities. This commitment extends to the generations of Californians to come. So what was happening in California that gave rise to the Proposition 20 Coastal Initiative campaign? In the decades preceding the campaign, California was experiencing explosive growth as well as environmental degradation along its shoreline. Between 1950 and 1970, half of California's 16 coastal counties more than doubled in population. Los Angeles County increased 511%. Orange County grew by 557%, from a population of just over 216,000 to 1.4 million people. Many Southern California coastal cities doubled, tripled, or quadrupled in size. For instance, population of Huntington Beach swelled from just over 11,000 to 170,000. Land use decisions that enabled these rates of growth were entirely under the purview of local governments, with no statewide or regional planning mechanism to consider the cumulative effects on the coastal environment. In 1961, 3 San Francisco Bay Area women, Kay Kerr, Sylvia McLaughlin, and Esther Gulick, started a public movement to save San Francisco Bay from numerous shorefront projects that were rapidly filling in the San Francisco Bay. They projected that over time, most of the bay would be filled. They successfully organized a cadre of local activists and lobbied the legislature for a law to regulate bayfront development. Their pressure led to the passage of the McAteer-Petras Act in 1965, which created the Bay Conservation and Development Commission, or BCDC. In 1969, an offshore oil well blowout created a huge oil spill off the coast of Santa Barbara, impacting a large area of the south central coast and garnering national attention. The spill was the first serious environmental disaster to be covered extensively by television network news. It riveted the nation and galvanized the public. Some of the San Francisco activists behind the creation of BCDC decided to broaden their coalition and parlay their regional success into a statewide effort to pass a more comprehensive law protecting California's unique coastal resources. During this period, the modern environmental movement began transforming national politics. In January of 1970, President Nixon signed the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA, and the nation celebrated the first Earth Day a few months later. The years that followed brought several landmark environmental laws, including the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, and the Endangered Species Act. The least known of these is the Coastal Zone Management Act of 1972. which approved state programs and gave coastal states authority over federal projects that could affect coastal resources. Residents of coastal communities throughout the state were experiencing and witnessing an alarming transformation. Exclusive residential developments were rapidly eliminating public access to great swaths of beach in places like Malibu and Sea Ranch on the Sonoma coast. Plans were underway for a series of nuclear power plants along the coast, and numerous freeway expansions were already in the works. California's urban footprint was threatening sprawl and loss of agricultural land and other resource lands. There were many proposals that would have significantly altered the coastal environment and public access to the state's iconic shoreline. Some of these included proposals for more offshore drilling, plans to develop Bolinas Lagoon with a 1,600 berth marina, hotel restaurants, and shopping mall on an island created by dredging the lagoon. Proposal for a desalination and nuclear power plant on a 40-acre island off Newport Beach, and another nuclear plant proposed for Davenport near Santa Cruz. A convention center proposed for Lighthouse Point in Santa Cruz. Proposal for a freeway causeway in Santa Monica blocking the natural beach. High-rise buildings proposed in many locations, including large towers on the beach in Santa Barbara and in La Jolla and Coronado. Miles of shoreline in Southern California inaccessible to the public due to unregulated development and gated residential communities or subdivisions. Highway 1 proposed as a freeway in many locations with connectors to Highway 101. With all these threats, the public questioned the local government's ability to stand up to these forces and saw the need for statewide protection. Proposition 20 in 1972, known as the Save Our Coast Initiative, was supported by a coalition of more than 700 environmental, civic, and labor groups that came together to form the Coastal Alliance. Unable to get a coastal protection bill through the legislature in 1970, 1971, and 1972, coastal activists abandoned the legislative process in favor of a ballot initiative. Their grassroots strategies capitalized on widespread public opinion in favor of stronger environmental laws, relying entirely on volunteers to gather 400,000 petition signatures and waging a dynamic, creative, inclusive campaign. "Where's the beach?" A quote from an evocative Dennis the Menace cartoon became its rallying cry. On November 7, 1972, despite being outspent by a margin of 4-1, the Coastal Initiative passed by a decisive 10-point margin of 55%. This established the California State Coastal Zone Conservation Commission and 6 regional commissions. The passage of Prop 20 signaled Californian voters' strong declaration that the coast was a public resource deserving of heightened protection. Significantly, Proposition 20 contained far stronger language than any of the unsuccessful legislative efforts that preceded it. Giving the Commission a broad mandate from the people, its policies were intended to implement the following concepts. The California Coastal Zone is a distinct and valuable natural resource belonging to all the people and existing as a delicately balanced ecosystem. The permanent protection of the remaining natural and scenic resources of the coastal zone is a paramount concern to present and future residents of the state and the nation. In order to promote the public safety, health, and welfare, and to protect public and private property, wildlife, marine fisheries, and other ocean resources, and the natural environment, it is necessary to preserve the ecological balance of the coastal zone and prevent its further deterioration and destruction. And it is the policy of the state to preserve, protect, and where possible, to restore the resources of the coastal zone for the enjoyment of the current and succeeding generations. Proposition 20, 1972. Proposition 20 launched California's commitment to protecting the coast through comprehensive planning and regulation of coastal development. The proposition put in place an interim 4-year program to regulate development and directed the newly created commission to draft a long-range plan to guide future conservation and development in the coastal zone using maximum public input. The measure temporarily created a new state regulatory and planning agency to consider all new development projects proposed in the coastal zone. The legal standard for that review was the initiative's strong policies protecting public access, scenic views, coastal agriculture, and the coastal environment. As a result, numerous pending development plans and proposals could not go forward, while others were significantly downsized or modified. From 1973 to 1975, while beginning interim regulation of new development, the newly created commission was also busy preparing the California Coastal Plan, a blueprint for permanent coastal protection. The Coastal Plan was completed in 1975 after 3 years of what has been described as one of the most ambitious experiments in participatory land use planning ever attempted. The process involved 259 public hearings and hundreds more public workshops attended by thousands of participants. The process hit a frenzied peak during one 6-week period in which 6,000 people attended 20 public hearings. All the while, the Commission and its 6 regional commissions continued to conduct the new agency's regulatory responsibilities, acting on more than 16,000 permit applications statewide in 4 years. When the 433-page plan was submitted on schedule to the legislature on December 1, 1975, it had forged 162 policy recommendations from thousands of hours of public testimony. Referencing the diversity of opinion that went into its drafting, Chairman Mel Lane acknowledged in the Commission's 1975 transmittal letter to the legislature that the plan does not speak with one voice. Nonetheless, we believe it speaks for the people of California to meet 2 principal objectives. 1, to protect the California coast as a great natural resource for the benefit of present and future generations. And 2, use the coast to meet human needs in a manner that protects the irreplaceable resources of coastal lands and waters. The Commission's transmittal letter concluded by saying, "Now, the future of the California coast is in your hands." The California Coastal Plan became the foundation for the California Coastal Act of 1976. The legislature responded by drafting and passing the Coastal Act, which passed the legislature in the last hour of session on August 23, 1976. The Coastal Act made the Coastal Commission a permanent state agency and codified most of the policies contained in Prop 20 and many of the recommendations of the California Coastal Plan. In signing the law he helped to pass, Governor Jerry Brown said, "The beaches are for all the people. On a hot day, you find millions of people at the beach, and it is the whole spectrum, from rich to poor." The following year, the Coastal Act received federal approval under the Coastal Zone Management Act, conferring the authority to review federal activities, including offshore oil drilling. National Oceanic and Atmospheric Association, or NOAA, Administrator Robert Knecht, whose department was immediately and ultimately unsuccessfully sued by the American Petroleum Institute, approved California's plan and called it the nation's flagship coastal management program. The most essential part of the California Coastal Act of 1976 is Chapter 3, which contains the specific statewide policies to govern development in the coastal zone. The Act also established a unique partnership with local governments through the development and certification of local coastal programs. The mandate for local governments to develop LCPs is where state interests intersect with local interests in managing coastal resources and development. This state-local implementation framework is unique in the state and even the nation. While local land use decision-making and local home rule has a long history in California, under the Coastal Act, this governance approach is fundamentally changed. In order for coastal permitting to be delegated back to local governments, the local government must develop and the Commission must certify an LCP that conforms with the policies of Chapter 3 of the Act. The Coastal Act framework recognizes specific state interests that must be reflected in local decisions in the coastal zone. Certified LCPs implement the broad statewide goals and policies of the Coastal Act at the local level through land use plans and zoning ordinances. Once an LCP is certified by the Commission as adequately implementing Coastal Act policies, local governments can issue their own coastal development permits or CDPs. Until then, all new development must be approved directly by the Coastal Commission. Beginning in 1980 and for approximately the next 15 years, most LCPs were developed and certified by the Commission and permit authority transferred to most local governments pursuant to those LCPs. By 1981, the regional commissions were phased out, but the State Coastal Commission remained a permanent agency with certain retained permit authority under the Act and also some defined appeal authority to review local coastal permits. The Commission has devoted significant state and federal funds to support local LCP planning, approximately $21.4 million in grants from 1977 to 2018. As of 2019, close to 90% of the geographic area of the coastal zone is governed by certified LCPs, with most coastal permitting delegated to the local governments. But in recent decades, a new challenge emerged. As time went on and new scientific information was developed and conditions changed, these certified plans grew outdated. Most LCPs were critically in need of updated policies to confront the major challenges of climate change and sea level rise. To that end, the Commission is focused now on new financial support and technical guidance to assist local jurisdictions in addressing sea level rise. It's almost impossible to imagine what the coast of California would look like today if not for the Coastal Act. The Coastal Act, especially Chapter 3 policies, continues to be the strongest vehicle for ensuring coastal resource protection and public access. After 40 years of controversial implementation, significant resources have been protected and public access preserved and enhanced, and the California public still strongly supports coastal protection and values expanded public access. 4 decades of judicial interpretation have mostly strengthened Chapter 3 policies. As a result, the Coastal Act is widely regarded as one of the strongest environmental laws in the country and has withstood numerous legislative attempts to weaken it due to strong public support. However, the agency still faces continuing challenges to maximize public access for all Californians, especially underserved communities, and to protect beaches and habitat in an age of climate change. But the enduring legacy of the California Coastal Act is not found only in the things you see, but in what you don't see. The wetlands not filled, the public access not lost, the views not blocked, the farms and ranches not converted to tract homes. These and many other impacts were avoided by applying Coastal Act policies to all new development proposals. And because of the continuing commitment of staff, commissioners, and ordinary citizens who love their coast, those policies are still in place to protect coastal resources well into the future.